The signal came from the darkest corner of space that humanity had ever explored. It was weak, broken, and filled with static. But it was there, repeating over and over again, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. "Commander." Ethan Cole was drinking his third cup of coffee when the alarm went off. He had been awake for 16 hours already, watching the stars drift past the observation window of his ship. The exploration vessel Starward Bound had been traveling through unclaimed space for nearly 8 months, mapping systems that no human had ever seen before. It was lonely work, but Ethan had never minded the silence. Until now. He set down his cup and walked quickly to the bridge. His boots made soft sounds against the metal floor. Around him, the ship hummed with quiet energy, its systems working perfectly, as they always did. Lieutenant Maya Brooks was already at the communications station when he arrived. She was young, barely 26, but she had the sharpest ears in the fleet. If there was a signal to be found, Maya would find it. "What do we have?" Ethan asked, moving to stand beside her. Maya's fingers moved across her console. Her face was pale in the blue light of the screens. "It's a distress call, sir. Alien in origin. I've never heard anything like it before." She pressed a button, and the signal filled the bridge. It was a strange sound, somewhere between a song and a scream. There were no words that Ethan could understand, but the meaning was clear. Someone, somewhere, was dying, and they were begging for help. First Officer Daniel Price arrived moments later, still pulling on his uniform jacket. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of too many difficult decisions. He listened to the signal for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "Could be a trap," he said. "Pirates sometimes use fake distress calls to lure ships into ambushes." "It's not fake," Maya said firmly. "The signal degradation is consistent with a failing power source. Whoever sent this, their ship is dying. And I'm detecting organic life signs at the source coordinates. At least 40 of them, maybe more." Ethan stared at the star chart on the main display. The signal was coming from a small planet in an unnamed system, 3 days away at maximum speed. It was deep in unclaimed space, far from any known civilization. There would be no backup if things went wrong. No rescue if they found themselves in trouble. He thought about his crew. 23 men and women who had trusted him with their lives. They had families back on Earth, dreams and hopes and futures waiting for them. Did he have the right to risk all of that for strangers they had never met? But then he thought about the signal, about the fear and desperation in that alien voice, about 40 souls crying out into the void, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear them. "Plot a course," Ethan said quietly. "Maximum speed." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded and began giving orders. What none of them knew, what they could not have known, was that the signal had been heard by dozens of ships across the sector. The Valkyrie, a peaceful species known for their advanced medicine, had picked it up 3 days earlier. Their scientists had analyzed the source planet and concluded that the conditions were too dangerous for a rescue mission. The gravity was too strong. The atmosphere was too toxic. The electromagnetic storms would destroy their delicate equipment. They had sent a message of sympathy and moved on. The consortium, a vast trading alliance that spanned 100 systems, had also heard the signal. Their analysts had calculated the cost of a rescue mission against the potential benefits. The math did not work in favor of saving the aliens. There was no profit in risking expensive ships and trained crews for a species that had nothing to offer in return. They had marked the signal as received and filed it away. The Thrall Dominion, the most powerful military force in the region, had dismissed the signal entirely. The dying aliens were not their subjects. Their suffering was not the Dominion's concern. To respond would be to show weakness, to suggest that the Thrall could be moved by mere emotion, They had ignored the cries for help and continued with their patrol routes. Only the humans responded on the second day of their journey. Ethan called a meeting in the ship's small conference room. He stood at the head of the table and looked at his senior officers. Maya was there, along with Daniel. Sergeant Kyle Bennett represented the security team, his scarred face unreadable as always. Dr. Olivia Grant sat quietly in the corner, her medical bag already packed and ready. And Tony Russo, the ship's chief engineer, was fiddling with a small device in his hands, as he always did when he was nervous. "I want everyone to understand what we're flying into," Ethan said. "The planet has gravity about 30% higher than Earth. The atmosphere is filled with volcanic ash and toxic gases. There are electromagnetic storms that could knock out our equipment. This is not going to be easy." "Sounds like Tuesday," Kyle said with a small smile. A few people laughed, but the tension in the room remained. "I won't order anyone to join the landing team," Ethan continued. "This is volunteer only. If you want to stay on the ship, I will understand. There's no shame in it." Olivia raised her hand. "I'm going. Those life signs on the planet, they might be injured. They'll need medical help." "I'm going too," Tony said. "If their ship is damaged, they'll need someone who can fix things." Kyle simply nodded. He didn't need to say anything. Everyone knew he would be the first one off the ship. Ethan felt something warm spread through his chest. Pride, maybe. Or gratitude. These people, these ordinary humans, were willing to walk into danger for strangers they had never met. They didn't ask what species the aliens were. They didn't ask what they might gain from the rescue. They only knew that someone needed help. "All right," Ethan said. "Get some rest. We arrive in 18 hours. As the officers filed out of the room, Daniel stopped beside Ethan. The older man's face was troubled. "You know this could go badly," Daniel said quietly. "We don't know what we'll find down there. We don't know if we can trust these aliens. We don't know anything." "I know," Ethan agreed. "But I also know that if it were us down there, crying out for help, we'd want someone to answer." Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That's why I follow you, Commander. You still believe in doing the right thing." Ethan watched him go. Then he turned back to the window and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 40 beings were waiting for rescue. They had sent their signal into the darkness, hoping against hope that someone would care enough to come. They didn't know it yet, but the humans were on their way. And when humans decided to help, nothing in the universe could stop them. The planet looked like it had been designed to kill. From orbit, Ethan could see the massive volcanoes that dotted the surface, their peaks glowing orange with molten rock. Clouds of black ash swirled through the atmosphere, blocking out the pale light of the distant sun. Lightning cracked across the sky in endless waves, painting the darkness with brief flashes of white. "Sensors are having trouble cutting through the interference," Maya reported from her station. "But I've got the crash ship located. Northern hemisphere, about 3 kilometers from the only safe landing zone. Define safe," Daniel said dryly. "Relatively flat. Only minor seismic activity. Toxic gas levels within acceptable limits for our suits." Kyle Bennett stood at the back of the bridge, already wearing his heavy environmental suit. He had added extra armor plating to the chest and shoulders. His rifle was strapped to his back, and a dozen other tools hung from his belt. He looked like a soldier preparing for war, which in some ways he was. "Sounds good enough to me," Kyle said. "Let's go." The landing shuttle dropped through the atmosphere like a stone falling through water. Turbulence shook the small craft violently, throwing the passengers against their restraints. Tony Russo gripped his seat with white knuckles, his face turning slightly green. Olivia Grant sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. Kyle just smiled. He had been through worse. The shuttle touched down on a plain of dark gray rock. Steam rose from cracks in the ground, carrying the smell of sulfur even through the sealed doors. The temperature outside was hot enough to boil water in some places, cold enough to freeze blood in others. The gravity pressed down on them like an invisible weight, making every movement slightly harder than it should be. "All right," Kyle said, standing up and stretching his muscles against the extra pull. "Stay close. Move fast. Don't breathe the air no matter what." The four of them stepped out onto the surface of an alien world. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Mountains of black glass rose in the distance, formed by ancient volcanic eruptions. Rivers of glowing lava cut through the rock, filling the air with waves of brutal heat. The sky above was a churning mass of clouds and lightning, never still, never quiet. To most species in the galaxy, this would have been a death sentence. The Valkyrie would have died within minutes, their fragile bodies crushed by the gravity and poisoned by the air. The consortium traders would have lost every piece of equipment they owned to the electromagnetic storms. Even the mighty Thrall would have struggled, their cold-blooded bodies unable to regulate temperature in such extreme conditions. But humans had evolved on Earth, a planet that the galactic community would later classify as a Category 12 death world. Humans had survived ice ages and heat waves, volcanic winters, and meteor impacts. They had climbed mountains that touched the sky and dived into oceans that crushed submarines like paper cups. They had lived through plagues and famines, wars and disasters. This planet was dangerous. But humans had been dealing with dangers for their entire existence. Kyle led the way across the rocky ground, his boots finding solid footing with practiced ease. Behind him, Tony carried a pack full of repair equipment, his engineer's mind already working on how to seal a damaged ship in these conditions. Olivia walked in the middle, her medical supplies carefully protected against the harsh environment. And at the rear, a young security officer named Jake Morris watched their backs, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of threat. They found the crashed ship at the base of a cliff, half buried in ash and debris. It was small, designed for maybe 50 passengers at most. One of its wings had been torn away, and the hull was cracked in several places. Smoke and steam rose from the wreckage, mixing with the toxic air. "Hello?" Olivia called out, her voice carrying through her suit's external speakers. "Is anyone there?" "We're here to help." For a long moment, there was no response. Then a section of the damaged hull moved, pushed aside by small, trembling hands. A face appeared in the opening, and Kyle felt his heart stop for just a moment. The alien was unlike anything he had ever seen. Small, barely reaching his waist, with skin that seemed almost transparent. Large, dark eyes stared at him with obvious terror, taking in his massive form, his armor, his weapons. Behind the first alien, he could see others, huddled together in the darkness of the broken ship. They were afraid of him, and Kyle understood why. To them, he must have looked like a monster from their worst nightmares. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to one knee. He removed his rifle and set it aside. Then he pulled off his helmet, exposing his scarred face to the toxic air. He had maybe 3 minutes before he would need to put it back on, but he wanted them to see his eyes, to see that he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly, the same words he had once used to calm frightened children in war zones back on Earth. "We're here to help. We're not going to hurt you." The alien who had first appeared, a being named Cerise, though Kyle did not know this yet, stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, Cerise stepped forward out of the ship. "You came," Cerise said, voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "You actually came." "Of course we did," Kyle replied simply. "You called for help." What followed was the longest 3 hours of Kyle's life. The Veluxy, as the aliens called themselves, had been stranded on the planet for nearly 2 weeks. Their ship had been damaged by an asteroid strike, forcing an emergency landing on the nearest planet. They had sent their distress call, hoping someone would hear. But as the days passed and no rescue came, they had begun to lose hope that now there were 47 of them left, down from the original 60. The planet had claimed the rest one by one. Tony worked on the ship's hull, sealing the breaches with emergency patches and borrowed materials. It wasn't pretty work, but it was effective. Within an hour, the ship was airtight again, protected from the worst of the toxic atmosphere. Olivia moved among the Veluxi, treating injuries and illnesses with steady hands and a warm smile. Many of them flinched away from her at first, frightened by her size and her strange appearance. But she was patient and gentle, and soon they were reaching out to her, trusting her with their pain. The real test came when the storm hit. It rolled across the plain like a wave of destruction, bringing winds that could tear metal apart and lightning that could stop a heart. The Veluxi screamed in terror, certain that death had finally come for them. Kyle looked at the storm, then looked at the group of injured aliens who could not move quickly. There were 7 of them, including 3 children. The ship would not protect them, not in its damaged state. They needed to reach the shuttle, but the shuttle was 3 kilometers away, and the storm would be on them in minutes. Olivia, take the ones who can walk, Kyle ordered. Tony, Jake, help the slower ones. I'll carry the rest. He picked up 2 of the children in his arms, then bent down so a third could climb onto his back. The young Veluxi clung to him with surprising strength, their small fingers gripping his armor. Then Kyle Bennett ran straight into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical force, trying to knock him off his feet. The lightning cracked around him, close enough to leave spots in his vision. Ash and debris filled the air, cutting visibility to almost nothing. Every breath was a struggle. Every step was a fight, but Kyle kept moving. He had made a promise, and humans kept their promises. Behind him, the rest of the team followed, carrying and supporting the Veluxi through conditions that would have killed any other species in the galaxy. They moved through fire and poison, through wind and lightning, through everything the universe could throw at them. And when they finally reached the shuttle, every single one of the 47 Veluxi was still alive. Cerise looked up at Kyle with those large, dark eyes. The human was covered in ash and burns, his armor dented and scorched. But he was smiling. Why? Cerise asked, unable to understand. Why would you risk so much for us? Kyle looked down at the small alien in his arms. He thought about the question, about all the complicated answers he could give about duty and honor and humanity. But in the end, there was only one answer that mattered. Because you needed help, he said. That's all. And in that moment, history was made. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire burning through dry grass. It started with the Veluxi, who told their story to anyone who would listen. Then the traders picked it up, carrying tales of the strange humans from system to system. Within weeks, every species in the sector knew what had happened on that distant, deadly planet. The Deathworlders had answered a cry for help, and they had succeeded where everyone else had failed. Ceres stood before the Galactic Assembly, a gathering of representatives from over 200 species. The chamber was enormous, filled with beings of every shape and size imaginable. There were the tall, graceful Valkyrie with their silver skin and gentle eyes. There were the insect-like Cricks who communicated through patterns of colored light. There were the consortium traders in their expensive clothes, and the Thrall warriors in their ceremonial armor. And in the observer gallery, there were humans. Just a small delegation, led by Admiral Patricia Dunn. They had been invited to watch, though not yet to speak. The galaxy was still deciding what to make of this new species. Cerise was nervous. The Veluxi were not a powerful people, not an important people by galactic standards. They had no great fleets or mighty armies. They were scientists and artists, farmers and teachers. The idea of speaking before such an assembly would have seemed impossible just months ago. But Cerise had a story to tell. And it was a story that needed to be heard. We sent our distress signal knowing that help would probably not come, Cerise began, voice soft but clear. We knew the conditions on that planet. We knew that rescue would be dangerous, perhaps impossible. We had already accepted that we were going to die. The chamber was silent. Every eye, every sensor, every attention was focused on the small Veluxy standing alone on the speaker's platform. Then the humans came. Cerise described the rescue in detail. The shuttle dropping through the deadly atmosphere. The 4 figures in their heavy suits walking across ground that would have killed any other species. The big one, the soldier with the scarred face, kneeling down and removing his helmet just so he could look them in the eye. He breathed poison air for 3 minutes, Cerise said, just so we could see his face, just so we could know he meant us no harm. Several members of the assembly shifted uncomfortably. The idea of voluntarily exposing oneself to toxic atmosphere was horrifying to most species, but Cerise was not finished. When the storm came, he carried our children through it. Not because he had to, not because anyone ordered him to. He did it because he saw people in danger, and he could not walk away. Cerise turned to look directly at the human delegation. I asked him why. Why would he risk so much for strangers? Why would he walk through fire for people he had never met? Do you know what he said? The chamber waited. He said, because you needed help. That was all. As if it was the simplest thing in the universe. Back on Earth, Commander Ethan Cole was being asked the same questions by different people. His debriefing had lasted for 3 days now, conducted by admirals and politicians and scientists who all wanted to understand what had happened. They wanted to know if the aliens could be trusted. They wanted to know what humans might gain from the relationship. They wanted calculations and projections and strategic assessments. Ethan was tired of calculations. We saved 47 lives, he said for what felt like the 100th time. That's what we gained. That's all that matters. Admiral Dunn, who had returned from the Galactic Assembly just that morning, gave him a long look. She was a hard woman who had spent her career preparing for the day when humanity would meet other species. She had expected war. She had expected competition. She had expected the cold mathematics of survival, Don. She had not expected this. The galaxy is talking about us, she said. Every species knows the story now. The Veluxy have become famous simply because they were saved by humans. Is that bad? I don't know yet. The smaller species, the weaker ones, they're looking at us with hope. They see what we did, and they wonder if maybe the universe isn't as cold and cruel as they thought. She paused, and something complicated crossed her face. But the powerful ones, the Thrall and their allies, they see it differently. They see us as a challenge, a threat. We made them look bad by doing what they refused to do. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. What are you saying? I'm saying that our actions have consequences. Good or bad, we've put ourselves on the map. And not everyone is happy about it. The consequences came sooner than anyone expected. 3 weeks after the rescue, long-range sensors detected a fleet entering the outer edge of the solar system. The ships were massive, dark, and heavily armed. They belonged to the Thrall Dominion, the most powerful military force in the region. There were 15 of them. Earth had exactly 3 ships capable of fighting at that level. Emergency meetings were called across the planet. Politicians argued. Generals planned. Citizens watched the news with growing fear. No one knew what the Thrall wanted, but no one believed they had come in peace. The message arrived on a dedicated diplomatic channel. It was delivered by the Thrall Fleet Commander, a being named Vorthek, who had led wars that had lasted longer than human civilization. "You have embarrassed us," Vorthik said, his image appearing on screens across Earth. He was tall and covered in dark scales, with eyes that glowed a deep red. "You have made the other species question our judgment. They whisper that the humans showed courage where the Thrall showed cowardice. This is not acceptable." Admiral Dunn responded on behalf of Earth. She stood straight and spoke clearly, showing no fear even though her heart was racing. "We did not intend to embarrass anyone. We simply responded to a distress call. Anyone would have done the same. But anyone did not," Vorthik replied coldly. "We did not. The Valkyrie did not. The Consortium did not. Only you, these newcomers, these primitives from a death world, only you thought it was worth the risk. And now the galaxy thinks less of us because of it. That's not our fault. Fault is irrelevant. What matters is balance. What matters is that the universe returns to the way it was before you arrived." Vorthik leaned forward, his red eyes burning with cold anger. "You will publicly state that your rescue was a mistake. You will say that you acted rashly, without proper consideration. You will apologize to the galaxy for your foolishness." Dunn stared at him. "And if we refuse? Then we will destroy your fleet. We will bombard your cities. We will show the galaxy what happens to those who challenge the Thrall Dominion." The transmission ended. Silence fell across Earth like a heavy blanket dot in the emergency meeting that followed. Some argued for compliance. The Thrall were too powerful. Humanity was too new to the galactic stage. It wasn't worth dying over pride, but others disagreed. "If we apologize for saving lives," Ethan said, standing before the Council of World Leaders, "then we're telling the galaxy that we don't believe in what we did. We're telling them that we'll bow to anyone who threatens us. We're telling them that human compassion has a price tag." "And if we don't apologize?" the president asked. "If we stand firm and the Thrall attack?" Ethan thought about Kyle carrying children through a storm, about Olivia treating wounds with gentle hands, about Tony sealing a broken ship so strangers could breathe. "Then we fight," he said, "and we show the galaxy what humans are made of." The decision was made within hours. Earth would not apologize. Earth would not bow. Whatever came next, humanity would face it standing straight. The message was sent to Vorthik, no doubt, and across the galaxy. Smaller species watched with growing hope. The Deathworlders had drawn a line. Now everyone would see what happened when that line was crossed. Captain Nathan Gray had been preparing for war his entire adult life. He had studied ancient battles and modern tactics. He had trained in simulations that felt so real they gave him nightmares. He had risen through the ranks because everyone who served with him knew one thing with absolute certainty. When the moment came, Nathan Gray would not back down. The moment had come. He stood on the bridge of the Defiance, Earth's newest and most powerful warship. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. They were scared, he knew. Only fools wouldn't be scared facing odds like these. But they were also ready. "Status report," Nathan said, his voice calm and steady. Lieutenant Sophie Lane looked up from her tactical display. She was young, barely 30, but she had the mind of a chess master and the nerves of a surgeon. "The Thrall fleet is holding position at the edge of the system. 15 ships total. 8 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, 3 support vessels. They outgun us roughly 15-1. And our forces? The Defiance is at full combat readiness. The Guardian and the Resolute are moving to support positions. All defense platforms are online, and targeting solutions are locked. 3 ships and a handful of orbital platforms against 15 warships that had conquered empires." The math was brutal, but Nathan had never been good at math anyway. "Open a channel to the fleet," he ordered. Sophie pressed a button. And suddenly, Nathan was speaking to every human ship in the system. "This is Captain Gray. By now you all know why we're here. The Thrall have given us a choice. We can apologize for saving lives, or we can fight. Well, I don't know about you, but I've never been very good at apologizing." A few nervous laughs came through the channel. "I won't lie to you. The odds are bad. Really bad. But I want you to think about something. A few weeks ago, a small group of humans walked into a storm that would have killed any other species in the galaxy. They did it to save strangers. They did it because it was the right thing to do. And every single one of those strangers made it out alive." Nathan paused, letting his words sink in. "That's who we are. We're the people who walk into storms. We're the people who don't run when the odds are against us. We're the people who stand up for what's right, even when it costs us everything. And if the Thrall want to test that, well, they're about to learn why our planet is classified as a death world." He cut the channel and turned back to the main display. The Thrall fleet sat there like a dark cloud, waiting. "Sir," Sophie said quietly, "incoming transmission from the Thrall flagship. Put it through." Vorthic's face appeared on the screen. The Thrall commander looked annoyed, as if this whole situation was an inconvenience beneath his dignity. "Your defiance is foolish," Vorthic said. "You cannot win. Your ships will be destroyed. Your world will burn. And for what? For pride? For stubbornness? For principle," Nathan replied. "Something I'm beginning to think your species doesn't understand." Vorthic's eyes narrowed. "You dare lecture me about principle? The Thrall have ruled this region for 10,000 years. We have brought order to chaos. We have crushed threats before they could grow. Everything we do for the good of the galaxy, including letting innocent people die when you could have saved them. Those Veluxi were not our responsibility. Their survival or death had no bearing on galactic stability. Resources spent on rescue missions could be better used elsewhere." Nathan shook his head slowly. "And that's the difference between us, Vorthic. You see people as resources, as numbers in a calculation. We see them as lives. Every single one of them precious and worth protecting. Then, you are weak. Maybe, but we're also still here. And we're not going anywhere." Vorthic stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the Thrall commander smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Very well. You have chosen your fate. When your ships are burning and your people are dying, remember that I offered you a chance to surrender." The transmission ended. Nathan turned to his crew. They were all looking at him, waiting for orders. Waiting for him to tell them what to do next. "All hands to battle stations," he said. "This is not a drill." The standoff lasted for 6 days. 6 days of tension that wound tighter with every passing hour. 6 days of weapons locked on targets, of shields raised and fighters ready. 6 days of waiting for someone to blink first. On the 3rd day, the Thrall tested human defenses. They sent a single destroyer forward, firing warning shots that came close enough to make the point. Nathan ordered his ships to hold position. He did not fire back, but he did not retreat either. On the 5th day, something strange happened. A small ship appeared at the edge of the system. Then another, and another. "Sir," Sophie said, her voice filled with disbelief, "I'm detecting multiple incoming vessels. They're not human, and they're not Thrall. Who are they?" The answer came as the ships moved into visual range. They were Velkari, their elegant silver vessels forming a protective line alongside the human fleet. And they were not alone. Behind them came the consortium traders, their merchant ships modified with weapons that no one had known they possessed. Then came the Krix, the insect-like species who rarely left their home system. Then came a dozen other species, each one small and weak by galactic standards. each one ignored or dismissed by the mighty Thrall Dominion, and at the front of them all, broadcasting on all frequencies, was Cirrus. "We stand with the humans," the Veluxi ambassador announced. "They answered our cry for help when no one else would. They walked through fire to save us. They showed us that courage and compassion still exist in this universe. We will not abandon them now." Nathan watched in amazement as the fleet of unlikely allies took up positions around the human ships. They were still outgunned, still outmatched. But they were no longer alone. "This is the Velkari High Council," a new voice said over the communications channel. "We should have answered the Veluxi distress call ourselves. We calculated the risks and turned away. That was wrong. The humans showed us what we should have done. We will not make that mistake twice." One by one, the other species added their voices. The consortium explained that some things were worth more than profit. The Krieg said that they had watched too long without acting. Each of them had their own reasons, but all of them agreed on one thing. The humans had reminded them what it meant to be civilized. On the Thrall flagship, Vorthik watched the gathering fleet with growing unease. This was not what he had expected. These small, weak species were supposed to be afraid. They were supposed to stay out of the way while the Dominion taught the humans a lesson. Instead, they were standing together, standing with the Deathworlders. "Commander," one of his officers said nervously, "our tactical advantage is diminishing. If we attack now, we will still win, but the cost will be higher than projected." Vorthik said nothing. He was thinking about something that had not occurred to him before. The Thrall had ruled through fear for 10,000 years. They had crushed anyone who challenged them. But the humans had not challenged them with weapons. They had challenged them with kindness, with compassion, with a simple act of rescue that had somehow united species who had never stood together before. How do you fight that? "Commander, what are your orders?" Vorthik looked at the combined fleet on his display. Human ships surrounded by allies who had chosen to stand with them. Not because they had to, not because they would gain anything from it, but because the humans had shown them a different way. "Withdraw," Vorthik said quietly. "Sir?" "I said withdraw. All ships, return to Dominion space." The Thrall fleet began to turn, their massive ships slowly moving away from Earth. It was not a retreat, Vorthik told himself. It was a tactical redeployment. The Thrall would return one day, stronger and better prepared. But deep down, he knew the truth. The galaxy had changed. The humans had changed it. And nothing would ever be the same again. On the bridge of the Defiance, Nathan Gray watched the Thrall fleet disappear into the darkness of space. Around him, his crew was cheering, hugging each other, crying with relief. But Nathan's eyes were on the other ships, the allies who had come to stand beside them. Small species and weak species, peaceful species and forgotten species. All of them united by a simple idea, that people should help each other. Maybe that was what humanity had really brought to the galaxy. Not weapons or technology or resources, but hope. The hope that even in the coldest reaches of space, warmth could still be found. Sophie came to stand beside him. "Sir, we won." Nathan nodded slowly. "No, Lieutenant. We all won. Together." And across the galaxy, smaller species heard the news and began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future would be different. 5 years had passed since the rescue of the Veluxi. 5 years since a small group of humans had walked into a storm and changed the galaxy forever. "Commander," Ethan Cole stood at the edge of a balcony on the space station Unity, looking out at a view that would have been impossible just a decade ago. Ships from 100 different species moved through the surrounding space, their lights twinkling like stars come to life. Below him, in the vast central plaza, humans and aliens walked together, talked together, lived together. The Galactic Alliance had been formed 3 years after the Thrall withdrew. It wasn't a government, not exactly. It was more like a promise. A promise that the member species would help each other, that no cry for help would go unanswered, that compassion would be valued as highly as strength. Humans had not asked to lead the Alliance. They had not demanded special treatment or sought power over others. They had simply continued doing what they had always done, helping where they could, fighting when they had to, and treating every life as if it mattered. Somehow, that had been enough. "You look thoughtful." Ethan turned to find Ceris standing behind him. The Veluxy ambassador had grown in the past 5 years, not physically, but in other ways. There was a confidence in those large, dark eyes that had not been there before, a certainty that came from knowing one's place in the universe. "Just remembering," Ethan said. "Hard to believe how much has changed, is it? I look at what humans have done and I think, of course, this is how it happened. Of course, you changed everything. It was always going to be this way." "That's a generous interpretation." Cerise moved to stand beside him at the balcony railing. Together, they watched the ships move through the darkness. "Do you know what I tell people when they ask about humans?" Cerise said. "I tell them about Kyle, about how he carried our children through fire, about how he breathed poison air just so we could see his face. I tell them that everything humanity does, they do with their whole heart. No calculations, no conditions, just action." Kyle would be embarrassed to hear that. Kyle is too busy training rescue teams on 6 different worlds to be embarrassed about anything. That was true. After the founding of the Alliance, Kyle Bennett had become something of a legend. Species who had never considered rescue work as a possibility now had dedicated teams trained in human techniques. They called it the Bennett method. Go in fast, don't hesitate, and never leave anyone behind. Olivia Grant had done something similar with medicine. Her interspecies medical exchange program had saved thousands of lives by teaching alien doctors human techniques and learning alien techniques in return. She had discovered that human immune systems could adapt to almost anything, which led to breakthroughs in disease treatment that benefited everyone. Tony Russo had revolutionized ship design. He combined human durability with alien elegance, creating vessels that could survive conditions previously thought impossible. The new generation of Alliance ships could land on worlds that would have been death sentences just years ago. And Daniel Price, good steady Daniel, had become the Alliance's chief diplomatic liaison. He spent his days traveling from world to world, solving problems and building bridges. He had a gift for making different species understand each other, for finding common ground where none seemed to exist. "They ask me," Cerise said quietly, "what makes humans special? Why did you come when no one else would?" And I tell them, it's not your strength, though you are strong. It's not your resilience, though you are resilient. What is it then? Cerise looked up at Ethan with those large, expressive eyes. It's that when you heard us crying out in the dark, you did not calculate the odds. You did not weigh the costs. You simply came. And that, Commander Cole, is something the galaxy had forgotten was possible. The ceremony began an hour later. Representatives from every Alliance species gathered in the central plaza, filling the space with a rainbow of colors and shapes and sizes. There were the silver Valkyrie and the colorful Cricks. There were the consortium traders in their finest clothes. There were dozens of species whose names Ethan was still learning. And at the front, standing on a platform where everyone could see, were the humans who had started it all. Admiral Patricia Dunn was there, retired now but still sharp as ever. Kyle Bennett stood at attention, his scarred face softened by an unusual smile. Olivia Grant wiped tears from her eyes as she looked at the crowd. Tony Russo fidgeted nervously with a tool he had slipped into his pocket out of habit. Ethan took his place at the podium. He had a speech prepared, written by professionals and approved by committees. But as he looked out at the assembled crowd, at the faces of friends and allies and people who had once been strangers, he set the speech aside. 5 years ago, he began, we received a distress signal. It was weak and broken, full of static. But somewhere in all that noise, we heard a voice calling out for help. And we answered. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I won't stand here and tell you that we did something special. We didn't. We did what anyone would do. What everyone should do. We heard people in trouble, and we went to help them. That's not heroism. That's just being decent. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of the aliens looked confused. Humans were strange creatures, unable to accept praise even when it was deserved. But something amazing happened because of that simple act. You all came together. Species who had never worked together before stood side by side. Peoples who had been alone for generations found new friends. And somehow, out of one small rescue mission, we built this alliance. Ethan looked at Cerise, who was standing nearby with the other co-chairs of the Alliance Council. The truth is, we didn't save you. You saved yourselves. You saw that the universe could be different, and you chose to make it so. All we did was show you that it was possible. He stepped back from the podium, and Cerise stepped forward. The Voluxi ambassador had grown into one of the most respected voices in the Alliance. A symbol of what could happen when different species work together. When I was rescued from that planet, Cerise said, I thought I had seen the best that any species could offer. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. But then I watched the humans stand against the thrill, knowing they could not win, refusing to back down. And I watched you all come to stand beside them. And I understood something important. Cerise looked around at the gathered crowd. We are all capable of greatness. All of us. It just takes someone to show us how. The ceremony continued with speeches and celebrations, with music from 100 worlds and food that represented 1,000 cultures. Humans and aliens danced together, laughed together, shared stories, made new memories. Late in the evening, when the crowds had thinned and the plaza was quiet, Ethan found himself back at the balcony. The stars stretched out before him, countless points of light in the endless dark. Still thinking? He turned to find Maya Brooks standing behind him. She had changed too in the past 5 years, grown into her role as one of humanity's leading communications experts. But she still had the same sharp eyes, the same quick smile. Always, Ethan admitted. I keep wondering if we did the right thing. If all of this is really as good as it seems. And he looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, ships were traveling to distant worlds. Rescue teams were training. Medical breakthroughs were being shared. Lives were being saved. I think we did okay, he said finally. I think we reminded the galaxy that it's possible to be good, to be kind, to help strangers just because they need help. Maya came to stand beside him. You know what the other species call us? Not just Deathworlders anymore. They call us Hope Bringers. Hope Bringers? Because that's what we brought to the galaxy. Hope, the hope that things can be better. That people can be better. That even in the coldest reaches of space, warmth can be found. Ethan thought about that. About Kyle carrying children through a storm. About Olivia healing wounds with gentle hands. About every human who had reached out to help someone different from themselves. I like that, he said. Hope bringers. The stars had seemed so empty before. The universe had seemed so cold and cruel. But now, looking out at the lights of 100 ships, at the gathering of 100 species, Ethan knew that things had changed. Humans had walked into the darkness and found people worth saving. They had answered a cry for help without asking what they would gain. And in doing so, they had shown the galaxy that kindness was not weakness, that compassion was not foolishness, that helping strangers was not a waste of resources. History had been made. not through conquest or destruction, but through a simple act of kindness that had rippled outward until it changed everything. And the best part was, they were only just beginning. The stars were full of friends now, and together, they would face whatever came next.